And welcome back to What America's Thinking. As we look ahead to 2024, we're taking a look at some interesting polling about the presidential election. According to a new Emerson College poll, 58% of Democrats said President Joe Biden should be the Democratic nominee, while 42% say it should be someone else. That same poll shows that Biden's approval ratings is 44%. That's up from a November survey that found that only 39% of Americans approved of the president's job performance.
Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump could have the Republican Party nomination in the bag. Polling by Emerson shows a substantial lead over potential primary challenger, Governor Ron DeSantis. With a substantial 26-point lead in the primary challenge, that's even with Governor DeSantis picking up 4 points since Emerson last polled voters on the issue in November. So, who do you think is... If it's not DeSantis, if it's not Trump, is there anyone in the Republican Party that might, jump in and actually make a long run for nomination?
Yeah, Rafael, I think at this moment in time, we only see DeSantis and Trump in the polls. It seems like they're very much sucking up the oxygen. In fact, I've been talking to a lot of Republican sources this week who say that DeSantis might be peaking too early. And we've certainly seen it before, such as in 2016 with candidates like Jeb Bush or even Scott Walker when Trump, came into the foray then. So, there's that question, and also a lot of sources saying, look, Trump already sort of has this in the bag. He has the name recognition. He has support among, many of the conservative grassroots in the Republican primary. He has a record he can run on. At the same time, though, there clearly is an appetite in other polling. There seems to be an appetite, according to other polling, that would show that that Republican primary voters are looking for something new. They're looking to a fresher face, and then in comes Ron DeSantis, maybe Nikki Haley, former Vice President Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State. So those are some names. Another name that some sources have been floating to me, and I've seen it written about a little bit, and obviously, this is something rather new, but Georgia Governor Brian Kemp is someone who has been floated a bit. I mean, he's very much seen as a tried and true conservative. He, was able to defeat the Trump faction in Georgia. He's distanced himself from the Trump faction while at the same time keeping a hold on those conservative voters. A lot of Republicans look to his gubernatorial election in 2022 as a blueprint as to how statewide Republicans across the country should win an election. So, he's another name that we should be keeping an eye out on as well. I don't know if he's necessarily been asked about it. He hasn't been included in this list as those some of the others I just mentioned, but something to keep an eye on.
I think you're right. I think Kemp and Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin,
yes,
I think is another interesting character, and I think the big difference that we can see in the way they express themselves. They certainly are not rhinos, as as the saying goes. They have been conservatives their entire life. They don't get called moderates very often, but they take a different approach to the culture war issues that really fuel Trump's popularity. And that Ron DeSantis has really tried to make his own by attacking wokeism without really being able to define it and sort of going to war against the concept. It didn't really work ever. It didn't work in the drug war, and what Ron DeSantis has to do is show that he didn't peak too early, because you're right. I think that is his biggest concern right now, but also that there's more substance in him than that. And I think somebody who won an election in what seemed to be a bluish state, like Glenn Youngkin, shows more substance, or at least shows that he can convince a key segment of voters that that substance is there. But so on the Democratic side, who could play Ted Kennedy to Jimmy Carter role. I don't see anyone who really wants to like pop their head up above the clouds.
I don't really see anyone either. I think they're, with the State of the Union next week, with Biden performing and, Democrats under Biden performing very well in the midterms. It seems like for the most part, Democrats have this theory and this strategy of saying, look, we got to keep united because, of course, we know what happened in the speaker's fight earlier this year when it looks like a party is in disarray. Democrats don't want to do that because they already look better because they are already so united compared to the Republican Party. So I think there will be a coalescing around Biden, or there appears to be a coalescing around Biden. That being said, though, moving on to 2028, for example, and, there still seems to be this looking at future stars of the Democratic Party because President Biden is 80 years old. If he wins re-election in 2024, there will be another nominee in 2028, too. So, some names I've heard floated are Josh Shapiro, the new governor of Pennsylvania, or Senator Raphael Warnock, won re-election last year in Georgia. These are Democrats who won in swing states. In Josh Shapiro's case, it can be argued that he was running against an incredibly weak candidate. Same thing for Warnock in a way, but they are relatively young men who are looked at as the future of the party. Josh Shapiro has that executive experience. Raphael Warnock has that experience in the Senate. So those are some names that are floated. But I want to go back to that point you made about DeSantis and Youngkin sort of comparing Florida and Virginia. I think that's so fascinating because I think their states, in a way, dictate their styles, even though they very much have very different personalities that are very much their own. In Florida, for all intents and purposes, is a red state now, a state where President Trump was popular for a while. Ron DeSantis, seen as sort of a Trump light or maybe a Trump Jr. in many ways, has made inroads in making it even more red. Glenn Youngkin, like you said, won in a purple state, which I would say is blue leaning. So I guess for Republican primary voters, my question is, what style do they prefer and what style wins nationally after we've had so many years of Trump at the helm?
Right. And does Trump step aside if he doesn't win that nomination? I mean, it wouldn't surprise anyone if he lost the nomination, didn't agree with that result, and ran as an independent, as a MAGA candidate anyway. So it is a very difficult decision for any Republican to make. And the one thing I'll say on the Democrats is it's not a question of if President Biden is going to announce. Mm-hmm. It's when President Biden is going to announce. And we know it soon. So even though President Biden's job approval ratings appear to be rising, the hypothetical rematch with former President Trump has Biden still trailing by 3 points. So according to Emerson College, 44% of Americans would support Donald Trump, 41% would back the current commander-in-chief, 10% would support an entirely different candidate, and 4% are still undecided.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess in terms of which direction Republicans go in now, I mean, what do you see happening among primary voters?
Well, primary voters want the more extreme candidate. Mm-hmm. That's true of any party. That's the nature of primaries. Trump has the inside lane on that because Trump really has I always struggle to call it the ideological inside lane of the Republican Party because it's not ideological, but it is the lane that pushes the base, that moves the base, and really says what Republicans are thinking, to borrow a phrase. What I don't know is if primary voters think he can win.
Right.
And primary voters want their party to win. So I don't know. Who do you see anyone really scaring Trump in the primary?
That's a good question. And I think this is going to be on the GOP establishment. And this, we have an RNC speaker race our RNC chairperson race, which is going to be happening at the moment of this taping. That could impact the messaging on this as well, because how do you communicate to Republican primary voters? Like, look, you want a conservative, but you want someone who performs well in a general election as well. So talking to Republicans as to how they get that message out, the sense I get is that that's going to be a bigger priority for them, candidate quality. You hear it from Steve Daines, the chairman of the NRSC, the Senate Republicans campaign arm. You hear it from Mitch McConnell, the Senate minority leader. So they're going to be talking about that at all levels of the primary. In terms of who's Trump's biggest concern right now, I think all of us would say at this moment, Ron DeSantis. But going down the line, I think, a Glenn Youngkin is obviously someone to watch. A former Vice President Mike Pence is also someone to watch. Another governor that we don't talk about as much, but he has floated the possibility of running for president, is Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, someone who is conservative and who has supported Trump, but he's not necessarily seen in the Trump lane. I should say former Arkansas governor.
Former, yes.
Yes, yeah, no, that's Sarah Sanders. So, we'll have to see, but this is going to be a crowded primary field no matter how you slice it.
Do you get the feeling that Trump's fundraising, Trump has always run with, I have a lot of money, and he has had a lot of money to fund his campaigns. Is it at risk in any way, or does that hold on the base also mean that he has a hold on Republican fundraising? Not
necessarily, and that's why I think you've been seeing figures like Ron DeSantis and Glenn Youngkin, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley. They're all making this cross-country tour, not only to meet with Republican primary voters, but Republican donors, and many Republican donors that have given to Trump before. So there's a fight for those donors, and those donors are going to be watching these polls and going to be watching to see how Trump performs. This weekend he'll be in South Carolina. That's going to be a big test for him because that's a must-win primary state for any presidential candidate. So we'll see how he performs there. But there's clearly a play that's being made for these donors in the party.
Right, and we don't know what the order of the states is going to be.
No.
We know Democrats are probably shifting the order. Republicans are a little bit more reluctant.
A little bit more reluctant. And, when you look back to Iowa and New Hampshire, like on the Democratic side, whoever wins Iowa and New Hampshire doesn't necessarily be the nominee. South Carolina is, in a way, much more reliable. So that's why you're seeing Trump. I think he's making a stop in New Hampshire tomorrow on Saturday, but the big event will be in the Palmetto State.
For sure. And he will continue to have the rallies no matter what. That is the one thing that we do know about Trump. Whether he wins, loses, competes or not, he will have the rallies.
The rallies are back.
Yes. Well, that does it for us this week. And that's another window into what America's thinking. We'll see you next time.